Welcome to The Art of Growth. I am Jim Zartman, and I am really excited. If you haven't subscribed yet to this podcast, please do so, because we have some incredible stuff coming up in this next year. Thanks to all of you tuning in and really putting this podcast on the map. We are now in a position where some bigger name experts want to come on the show, and that is a dream come true for us, but we are so excited because we think it'll be really helpful to you. So we are going to have some additional panels coming in the next year, but we also wanted to get some experts in as well. Today, though, we are responding to something that someone encouraged us to do, which is kind of get to the personal element of why Joel and I got into the Enneagram in the first place, what it's done in and through us in our own lives, and the motivation behind the work that we are doing and are continuing to do and will be doing in this coming season. The hub for all of our work is theartofgrowth.org, and you can contact us there about individual coaching or team coaching. If you want us to come into your organization, or if we can help you in some other way, please let us know. We also have a Facebook page and a Instagram, which is just Art of Growth. But let's go ahead and jump into this week's episode.
All right, yeah, so
Jump right
why
in.
did I get into this whole Enneagram thing to begin with? I think growing up as a very evangelical, Pentecostal kind of kid in the church world with my family, the scope of our world was really small. You know, my wife and I were having this reflection the other day that your world really defines a whole lot in terms of how you end up fleshing out your particular desires, your sense of calling, purpose, mission, the things you really feel like you want to do in this world. You know, jobs, careers, whatever exists in the world, that sort of narrows that down quite a bit. Although, today we have a million different options, it still narrows down considerably that part of who you are. So for me, I remember growing up in church thinking, I love seeing people grow, seeing people get unstuck, transform on a practical level. For me, it was either that I was going to end up as a therapist, psychologist, or as a pastor. And those two were really the only things that I could see. And during the time I grew up, there was a whole lot of stigma around mental illness and in the church world. You know, that kind of work was somewhat looked down on. It became tolerated, but it wasn't really the thing that got you a whole lot of positive feedback. It was, it was viewed as you're working with the mind or, the brain, but, you should be working with the soul and the spirit.
It was a second class calling, if you will. There's this heightened thing where if you're in pastoral work, well, that's sort of the ultimate expression of transformation, is sort of the way that it was communicated in that world.
Yeah, absolutely. So I ended up just saying, well, fine, if that's what it is, and I love to work with people, and I was looking forward to it. I actually didn't really give it too much thought and just sort of jumped in and became a pastor in my later 20s and continued doing that. So I think that's what prepared me was this desire that I had within me to see people really change and grow. That prepared me for what eventually became my introduction to the Enneagram. And when that happened was I'd first glimpsed at the Enneagram probably about 15 years ago. And it was with some friends, and they were talking about numbers and stuff, and I had no clue what that was. So I briefly looked at it. It made no sense to me. It didn't click with me at all. And then I had a couple other glimpses at it over the years, but nothing ever stuck. But I was also deeply interested in mystical faith, and that was speaking to me quite a bit.
What does that mean?
Well, so early mystics like the Church Fathers and some of their writings, and then through the Middle Ages, you have folks like Teresa of Avila and some others that just, just drew me. St. John of the Cross, I'd read them, and I thought they knew something, right? You can read some things, and sometimes you pick up on, something I don't know. Like, even if I don't fully understand what it is you're saying, it strikes me as something. You're not just making it up. Others I could totally read was like, I think you're making that up. That was my impression anyways. But not with these folks. I felt like they had encountered something. And these people that I was reading, like Father Richard Rohr and a bunch. I've got a bunch on my bookshelf and in my Kindle. And I thought, man, these people are speaking of a journey and of a path that seems outside of this sort of traditional narrow focus of these are the doctrines, these are the rules, this is the way you live, which is good for early stage of faith. I'm really a fan of it for, the early stages of pre-adolescence, and that was very helpful. But
They need concrete.
they do. They need to know
Right.
sort of the rules of the road, and
Right.
the black and white concrete thinking.
Yeah, it's very helpful to an early stage, but it gets in the way as you get older and you realize the world is not that cut and dry, not that simple, and a lot more nuanced.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's why I think I was running into this. There was a desire for that because my own world kept getting increasingly complicated. And the things that I once thought worked, they weren't working quite as well.
Go into that experientially. Tell that
Yeah.
story a little bit. What do you mean by it was getting more complicated?
I deal with trauma oftentimes in retrospect. I tend not to deal with things in the moment. And I had a number of different really painful events in my early 20s. My mom died. I got sick. Lots of crazy things were happening, none of which I dealt with. I just sort of kept moving right along in life. Well, the delayed effect of it was that it started to hammer away at my concepts of how the world works, how faith works, how you're supposed to experience things in life.
Right, because it was supposed to be almost formulaic, like go this path and you will gain this result.
Yeah.
And when you walk the path and don't get the result, life becomes complicated.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, and for some of us like me, I deny it initially. So I denied a lot of it. Like it's just, you just try to bolster and support the system because the system itself is what gives you security, a sense of belonging, a sense of identity. When I started feeling that being threatened, my initial reaction was, hold on for dear life. Don't let go of this faith system that you've grown up with. In retrospect, I can see that's how I dealt with the initial loss was just hunker down, fight even harder, hold on even tighter. But as the years went by, that's when the trauma starts to. That's when I start to process it. As years go by, rather than in the moment, or it just for me seems like it takes a while, and then as little moments of glimpsing at the pain, and it challenging my understanding of how things work, and that's I think what began to cause me to look at and be open to a mystical faith, which asks a different set of questions. The questions is, it isn't about deconstruction alone. Deconstruction is a part of it, but it isn't about that. It isn't about trying to get rid of previous beliefs. Right. As I think and I've done that, and that's reaction, reaction to something. It's in my anger about life and how things have worked, that then I look at the problem as being external to me. Yeah. Problems outside of me. And so I have to fight against that. The system failed me, right? The system that I grew up with failed me miserably, and so now I'm against it. And I seek to destroy it in every way I can, I do it in my typical 7 fashion, which is more stealthy. But I look to try to do it because it helps me I believe it's external to me, and it helps me to deal with it. But if you continue on the path, what eventually yields to is that you start to realize that it's not the external, it's really an internal issue.
You've talked about that on other podcasts, which is not just what happened to us, but how we responded or reacted to what happened that is really at the heart of it. That's the thing that we actually have to look at. And that's what it sounds like you were starting to look at in this space. It's just like, okay, the reaction against, which is a lot of people's solution. Something happened, I react against, I push hard against that thing, and suddenly I did have this enemy over here, but now I was all wrong about that. But the attitude stays the same. They just have a new enemy. But so trying that, but they were like, that really wasn't working for you.
No, because I started losing some friendships, losing some relationships because of how just I think I was angry, and it was coming out just coming out sideways. And then I started noticing its fruit was really bad in my home life, um, because it showed up in some strange ways at home. Not so strange, I guess, because when you perceive the enemy to be on the outside, the problem to be external to you, it's only a matter of time before the external gets closer and closer to you. At first, the system is to blame. You're blaming the system. It's everything external on the outside that's the cause of the problems. But then as you look inward or you look closer to home, if you've got a family, you'll start to notice that it's starting to happen in the family life as well. But you can still look at it as external. The problem is still outside of us. And the reason why we're even having problems at home is because of the proverbial enemy that lives outside of us. And it took me a little bit more time before I recognized if you continue along the path is so faithful to you. Because if you continue along the path, it starts to show you that the problem is closer to home than you ever imagined. The problem's within, It was right around that time that I started to notice something that looked like burnout, but I wasn't sure, and I didn't really want to admit it. It was sort of like, nah, I still feel fine. I'm still pushing hard, still working hard. But I was starting to notice some things physically. I wasn't sleeping. I was chronically both tired and wired at the same time. I couldn't sort of slow down, even if I wanted to. So even when there wasn't anything going on, I was manufacturing something to keep it going. I'd become really, really addicted to that dopamine hit, So I started feeling some strange symptoms. I wasn't sleeping well. I was having headaches. I was having all kinds of other physical symptoms. And my home life was increasingly tense, and my marriage wasn't doing well. I was starting to snap at my 5-year-old, and I hadn't up to that point. I was, super excited to have our child. What a gift. And so as I'm seeing all this happening, that was a moment. I remember it was a seminal conversation I had with my wife where we realized things were not working well at all. And it was at that point, we said, it's got to, whatever change has to happen in us has to happen in the home life before it happens outside of us. Like, we're in ministry and we're trying to change the lives of people,
Right.
but our business is to have a flourishing garden, within our home. And if that's not happening, then, we have no business being out there trying to change the lives of other people. That was a powerful moment, and that led to a few other moments of me recognizing it was time that I started doing some things to take my transformational journey to the next level. And that's when I ran again into the Enneagram through some of these modern mystics and reading their works and sometimes referencing the Enneagram. And I thought, well, let me take another look at it, and I did. And that's when it clicked, and I began seeing myself in a new way. And the system was so elegant to me because it just opened my eyes to and explained so many things.
Yeah.
And then it was a year later that I said to my wife, I think I'm supposed to go get certified in this. And I don't know why, and she's been on my magic carpet ride for a long time. And she just usually is, rolling her eyes and saying, okay, here we go again. Joel's chasing another idea.
Right.
But this time it was different. And she knew, and she said, no, this is what you're made for. And started the process of certification. That was when I saw for the first time a new way of being able to really both personally transform, but also help others as well. So
you make the decision to go get certified because there is sort of this internal sense or a call to go deeper with this work. What did you experience in that process that sort of doubled down on that? Because it's still at that point, it's investigation. It's like, okay, I'm going to look into this. I'm going to take this deeper. I'm going to go further with this, which is what we always do. Like, it seems like this is a leading or there's a path here, and then you step onto it And a lot of times you step onto it and you go, okay, there's not much here. Or there was like 6 months here and then I move on.
Yeah.
But there was something that made you go, I'm going to be continuing this for a while and I'm going to go a lot deeper.
Yeah.
Talk about the experience you had when you went out to Menlo Park and what was it like for you personally and what was happening in you that sort of doubled down on that feeling that you were called to this?
I had this sense when I first saw the Enneagram, not 15 years ago, but 4 years ago, when I took a good look at it and it impacted me, was for the first time I saw something that explained not my behaviors. Other personality systems, I'd done a lot of them. And there was moderate help in them. Like, oh, you're an extrovert. That explains sometimes some of but it didn't explain everything. It certainly didn't explain why. And it didn't explain why sometimes I feel like an introvert more than an extrovert. Why my wife looks more like an extrovert than an introvert, even though she's predominantly an introvert. Like, they didn't explain a whole lot of those things, and it didn't help us in any way to sort of grow either. And
it may be able to tell you what you are, but it didn't tell you where to go.
Not at all. It's sort of like the one size fits all. And this one was very tailored to the uniqueness within every individual. It opened up my eyes to the variety of different motivations and drives that people have out there. I see the world through my lens. I know that there are various differences out there, but they don't seem that different from me because I still see it through the lens of my type. And so even my work as a pastor was through my type. My reading even of the Bible was through my type. My everything that I did was through my type. My direction for people, my encouragement to them was always through my type, not understanding that they're completely different. I mean, to the degree that one author writes it as Planet 8, Planet 9, Planet 1, Planet 2. I mean, it just because I think that's really right on. That's how different it is, And when I saw that, it made so much sense. At first, I still had my suspicions, like, is it really that different? And then as I began hearing people describe themselves at the training, it really was. This is astounding. You really think this way. There's a completely different motivation for you.
Yeah.
And so if I gave you this advice, it wouldn't work for you because this is not your starting point. Like,
right.
If, for example, if I said, we should be more giving, right? Well, for a type 2, they would say amen to that. Like, that doesn't help them in any way, shape, or form because actually that's what their compulsion is to serve and help. For the sake of being wanted and welcomed into relationships. That really opened my eyes to the complexity of humanity. And then because I saw that and I saw my own motivation, I saw my own passion, my own core patterns, and I saw a pathway to growth.
Yeah.
That for me, I thought, I can't wait to continue diving more deeply into this for me personally. But wow, this could help lots of people. So this really touched my own desire to see people get unstuck, grow, transform, and I could see it happening in a much more tailored way and an effective way. So, yeah, that's a big part of what drew me.
Yeah, and I remember you saying, even while you were there, that you had this experience of being totally accepted, which you hadn't really experienced before.
Yeah.
You talked about, like, I feel I can be completely myself here.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no judgment. Just talk about that a little bit, because I thought that was just a really profound thing.
Well, when I was there, I thought, I know why I feel so welcomed and accepted. It's because it's the environment that's welcoming and accepting of me. Again, it still was external. It was like the problem is that when I come back to my home life, they're not that way. I think it took me a good probably year before I started realizing that's what I was doing. And that the problem really wasn't, again, that the environment certainly, by the way, the environment certainly was. I mean, the design, it was designed that way so that there's lots of grace. There's nobody saying, really, you probably shouldn't be this way. Or, hey, this is a bad thing that you are expressing. There was no one correcting or judging or anything like that, which was good. But that environment that was there was an environment that was designed for training and for that purpose. And so coming home, people are people. We're all running our lives. We're all going through our day-to-days, and we're doing it through the way we're made. When I was able to see that it was still external to me, that the environment was the problem, then I realized it was more of me having a hard time fully accepting me and taking the risks of being me in a public way that might mean that there's some rejection, and that can I handle that? Can I show grace to those people and be strong enough internally to continue to do that? That's really true freedom, right? So for me, I started practicing more of that. Can I do that? It did result, by the way, in some people moving away, for sure.
Yeah.
I lost relationships, which is very painful. Resistance is actually really, really important to your growth, just as it is for, physical development. And, if you're lifting weights and, resistance is critical for muscular development, and it's critical for psychological, spiritual development as well. So that resistance really started to grow me as I realized I lost these relationships, and yet still, here I am, and I do want to continue to grow. Yeah, so the externalized became internalized, and I can continue to find my freedom as a 7 and be who I am, authentically who I am, more so. Yeah.
There's also this element where when you get on the path, it confirms the path. We talk or joke about like this podcast becoming an accidental success, where yes, you were on this journey and we, pursued this entirely out of, what it was doing in us and for us. But it has been interesting that there hasn't really been any kind of like resistance or try with having like an influence in this world, where we literally were like, oh, you're going through certification and you need to record these panels because you really get to know a type when you hear them speak for themselves, instead of just like a person getting up and teaching about the types. And then, oh, we should just record them and throw them online. And then that has led to really an entirely different lifestyle and way of spending time than it was a few years ago, where you're actually getting to spend a lot more time specifically with people on their growth. I think there's something about that when you're acting in a way that's more congruent with who you naturally are wired to be. Like, yes, you always wanted to see people transformed, but so many of the methods or the tools didn't work for you personally in the way to connect with people and help them do that. But then as we've sort of gone down this road, it's like doors are opening without effort, and it just has expanded kind of out of nowhere. And I think there's something about like being willing to go on your path that sometimes it does question and there is resistance, but there's also this element where there's resistance, but there's not like so hard try. It's not forced. I'm trying to draw a line here. I don't exactly know how to draw, because yes, there's resistance to your path when you go into your growth, but there's also this thing where you're not trying to force life or make life happen. There is a natural outflow of it.
That's a great contrast. It's a great question, because it's one that I've been saying to a lot of my clients. And by the way, this is actually happening to a lot of my clients, just like with me, when they begin to walk down their path, their calling, their purpose. And they know this. I haven't run into a client yet who, as we work through and journey through their lives, they tune in to their true purpose, their true make. And when they begin to walk actively in that path, things open up. And sometimes it feels magical to them. Like, why did all of a sudden things are happening, right? But there's also resistance. That's also part of it. And sometimes it is external resistance. Sometimes there are people who resist because whatever you're doing is triggering them in some way. But much of the resistance I find is internal. It's more of like the struggle that's happening on the inside, where you have your self-doubts, you have the battles against your way of meeting, your typical way of meeting your needs oftentimes is not good for you. It was at one point designed to preserve you. That's the formation of the personality. But man, it does not work as you get older. You just like constantly try to get your needs met in a particular way. the growth path is counterintuitive. You have to go in a different way. And that experience itself is great resistance, right? So your type is fighting against you, the low side of your type. So I think that's what really you end up realizing is the resistance that you think is out there is oftentimes internal. And whatever is out there, by the way, that is actual resistance is almost always a reflection of internal resistance. Because if it wasn't, you wouldn't notice it. It wouldn't be a problem. But the reason why it has such impact on you is because it's reflective of an internal resistance you're experiencing. You know, for me, when systems or people would try to wrangle me in, so as a 7, I tend to run to the latest and greatest, chasing new ideas, new thoughts. Change is it's what I do. I don't like stasis.
Yeah.
Well, people in my network, people in the system, people that were part of my church or my friends or my family, it's tough on them. And they would eventually try to wrangle me in. Well, what I experienced was that felt to me like resistance, like external. These people are not moving forward. They're not growing with me. They're not, they're holding me back. And there's all sort of ways of moralizing it and spiritualizing it that we can do. But I notice now, I could see in retrospect what was happening is it's a reflection of an internal thing.
We all moralize the drive of our type.
Absolutely. It's like you guys are, you just don't want to grow. You don't want to change. You don't want to, there's all kinds of things I would say. But that was threatening this compulsion of mine internally. So the external was reflecting an internal problem. And my true problem was in here, was me. And once I could see that, then, working through that and beginning to learn how to stay a little bit longer, how to be present, how to not chase the latest and greatest, but still be creating new things. And that's the wonderful thing about our types is that we are designed to every low side, there's a high side, to every high side, there's a low side.
Totally.
Right?
But the health is in owning both.
No, absolutely.
That's where a lot of people stop. They'll only own, they moralize it because this is a good side of me, or they become super critical of the low side of them. But it's actually where we grow is in seeing both. I have this high 100%. Side and this low side, and own it. Own it. That I can. Oh man, if I could, put a highlight over that one and a big amen next to it. That is so much the work that I do with clients is both are always existing together. In great religious traditions and spiritual traditions, there's this concept of the dark and the light, chaos and order, yin and yang, they both exist. And our tendency is to view one as the problem. Right.
Both exist and both are necessary in our lives. So what we want to understand is that there's this dark side that's present, and it is sabotaging the high side. Yeah. And that's the reason why we notice it. So that we can begin to work in a different way. Anyways, but that's for coaching. So the idea of the external being a problem for me was very much that it was triggering the internal, and that was really the issue. And the more I became aware of that, the more I thought I could come back home from my training and begin to welcome and show grace to my environment, whatever environment that is. And I really think that's so important, particularly for today, where there's so much of this animosity, antagonism towards previous groups or groups you were once in or groups you dislike that there's so much of that. And if we could understand that what's really going on is that these externals are reflecting or triggering something that's happening internally. That we could actually experience true freedom and then begin to show grace to the world around us. That's the hope for transformation, both internally in our own personal lives, but also collectively.
Yeah. And I think that's why I get so frustrated sometimes is because of the ways that people make false attempts. They talk about people growing up fundamentalists, the statistics on them later becoming either atheists or agnostic or just completely rejecting faith, and how many people who grow up sort of fundamentalist atheists become fundamentalists of some kind of faith tradition later,
Mm-hmm.
because it's this externalizing, and we just switch teams, and like I just shift to the enemy instead of realizing that both are present within us. And I think that's why sometimes I get really frustrated by that, because it's like, you guys, you're trying to solve a problem with another problem. You're trying to fight fire with fire, using evil to fight evil. And it's not actually looking at both of it and saying, this is what's within me: glory, beauty, wonder, gifts, and destruction, and enabling, and patterns that have caused pain in my life. And actually realizing that both of those are in there. Let me look at them with grace and honesty, and not just go, well, I just need to switch teams because that's actually the better team.
It's funny because it's whole victim mentality, right? And the victim mindset isn't both the left and the right today in terms of politics. And it's like
everywhere.
It's everywhere. We all have a bit of that inside of us.
Yeah.
And by the way, are there true victims? Absolutely. Have you been victimized? Yes.
Yeah.
But there's also the recognition that
but blame and punishment is not going to solve the problem.
It's not going to solve the problem. There's a reaction you have,
right,
that you have to own, And part of the way we handle our own trauma is that it has made its way internally to us. And so we begin to both react against it, but then perpetuate sometimes that very same trauma. So it's noticing our reactions to it.
I think someone wisely said about the whole Me Too movement, they said that the Me Too movement will stall and become ineffective if it does not provide a path to redemption for offenders. And I think that's where we get stuck so often, is we want to have the enemy, or we want to have like, well, this person did something wrong, and it's punitive justice instead of restorative justice.
Yeah.
And until we actually get restorative with ourselves and our own issues, once we become restorative to ourselves and walking out our own path, we will become more restorative to others. Otherwise, we're going to spend generations swapping teams and clashing swords.
Yeah. I was just reminded of a client I was talking to about this. Like, you have to first receive grace for yourself. Now, this happened to me, and the reason why I was talking to this client about that is because this literally happened to me 2 weeks ago. I got into this little tiff with my wife, and my reaction to any sort of conflict is emotional shutdown and withdrawal. I can become really cold and dispassionate and removed, right? So I did so. I shut down, started to remove myself. I have this practice in the morning where it's a meditative practice, and part of that practice involves a component where I tune into the emotional center. And the way I do it, and it's a practice, so it doesn't always work, but it's working more and more as I continue to exercise it. And I ask my emotional center, is there anything you want to say right now? And being a head type, my head wants to immediately help my heart figure things out. So I have to tell my head to shut the hell up.
That's a great line. I love that.
That week, I had a moment where my emotional center spoke up pretty clearly. And it said, you are feeling unloved.
Wow.
And my head center wants to immediately figure that out and solve that problem and, analyze that. And so I had to tell my head center, calm down. It's not your turn yet. We're going to still stay with the heart center. I literally do this.
Yeah.
Because I'm so much a hijacker. My head hijacks the heart immediately, just overrides, just takes over the body and doesn't allow them to have say. I sat again with the heart and I said, why? What's going on? I said, because you got in this little tiff with your wife and you're not feeling loved. I said, oh, okay, right. So I'm not being loved. I don't feel loved. Okay, right, because of this thing that happened. And then I have this practice this is the positiva approach, which is positive thinking or imagination, involving the imagination. So imagining grace, like how would grace feel if I were able to extend grace to her, more grace to her? And so I began practicing that. And then it dawned on me, that's right. I'm telling every one of my clients, you have to first receive grace before you give grace, right? So I'm saying this, like you have to practice the receptivity.
Yeah.
Grace is available. It's for you. You have to receive it first.
Yeah. We teach it to practice it.
Oh my gosh, I
That's
do.
Why. We teach
totally,
it to practice
totally.
it. Yeah.
So it's like, okay, here we go. And I couldn't receive it.
Yeah.
I could not receive it. I was like, no. And it was just this resistance, like, I don't want to receive it.
Right.
I'm still pissed. It's like, wow, emotion, you're present, you're angry, you're feeling hurt, and you don't want to receive grace. It's funny, you shut down the emotional center, it's a whole shutdown. It's like you don't shut a part of it down. It's you can't receive grace, you can't give grace. I had to practice receptivity. And when I did, that's when things started to loosen. It was like a muscle that had been cramped, starts to loosen a little. But I could feel it. I could feel myself loosening in that space. And then I was able to pivot, and I did, and things changed. I was able to have a wonderful conversation with my wife about grace and just extending and deepening our love and our grace for one another and, tolerance. So, yeah.
I did. I was like, we teach it in order to practice it.
Yeah.
But that actually ties into the last question I was going to ask you, which is like, why coaching though? There's a lot of ways that people go and do things that they do, but why specifically were you attracted to the coaching aspect?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't at first. In fact, I actually got my training certification not in the practitioner or coaching. There were two tracks I could have taken, teaching and practitioners. I took teaching. There was no way I was interested in anything to do with coaching. Here's what I've been interested in is transformation and helping people grow. But for me, it was like one or two conversations and mostly through teaching message that I would give. But as I was there in Menlo Park getting trained, more and more, I was listening to people talk. I was meeting people who were doing this practitioner's track and having conversations with them. And so now instead of being really resistant to that whole idea, thinking it was boring and it wasn't going to be, why would I ever want to do it? I started to entertain it a little bit, just a little. After the training, we were supposed to do these typing interviews, help people figure out what their type is. My coach, a woman named Joan, and oh my gosh, she was amazing. She is amazing. She said to me, you can't type enough people. You really need to do it. You're only required 12, but you really need to do a lot. So I decided to do 60 in 3 months. And
now you've done like how many?
I've done hundreds now,
Hundreds, yeah.
So, but it was powerful. Like I was learning so much.
Mm.
And what it did for me is it forced me out of my entertainment mode that I tend to always be in as a 7. Mm. Always kind of like keeping that buzz, that energy high, the fun. And now I had to listen. I had to ask a lot of questions and listen and be still. I did that and I started noticing like, this is interesting. I'm coming home. I was observing something and I don't know how I got this insight, but I've always loved the buzz energy of the 7. This was a different kind of energy. And I thought to myself, I'm used to measuring things in terms of highs and lows, high energy, low energy. But this was a different type of energy. It was a qualitative difference.
Deep energy.
Like it was a restful, and it was odd. I'd seen it a few times in my life. It was like, it rings a bell. I've been here before, but it's not a common experience for me. And then I'd ask myself, how am I dispositionally when I come home? Do I feel upbeat? Do I feel more energetic? Do I feel more present? How do I feel? I was noticing I was more present to my wife, my son. I was more upbeat. I was a happier person, like really more deeply happy. As I thought, man, this is remarkable. So the more I did, the more I thought, I wonder if coaching would be. And then pretty soon, these typing people that I was typing were asking me, hey, do you do coaching?
Right.
As a 7, I never say no. So I said, sure. But here's the interesting thing, and this gets into a whole other subject that we will not have time to talk about here, but it's understanding your instincts. The wonderful Pete O'Hanrahan at Menlo Park, faculty teacher, does a lot on instincts. I thought I was a social 7. He's just so good. He said, so what do you think? I asked him, what do you think? Because I thought there was some hesitancy there when I said I'm a social 7. So I said, what do you think? He said, you could be a 7. Sure, you could be a social 7. Yeah. He says, I might look at the sexual 7 as well because it's just a different energy about you. So just maybe consider that. That's all. It's like, damn you, Peter. Consider that. It's like, it gets into your head and it won't come out.
Right,
so I'm
right.
like, oh. And I really didn't want to be a sexual 7. I don't know why. I didn't want to.
Same thing happened with Laura when I told her she was a self-pres 7. She's like, no. And then couldn't get away from it. And then like, I just thought of it because last week I got a text. She goes, I don't know how I ever thought I was anything but a self-pres. So I was like, you might want to look at the...
Yeah. You might want to just,
take a look at
that very open, suggestive way of, oh, I love it. So he said that to me. I thought, okay, I'll just, I respect him so much that I thought, well, I'll think about it. And then it came back to me while I was doing these typing interviews. And then it clicked. The more I understood sexual energy, it was like, oh, right.
Yeah.
So the systems I grew up in were predominantly social structures, churches, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So I'd learned to use my second in my stacking is social and low self-pres. But the sexual energy made a lot of sense. And now since I've become aware of that, it's understanding how to leverage that and use that, and also be aware of its limitations, sometimes overuse of it. But it's useful, definitely, in coaching as a sexual 7. The ability to sort of one-on-one, that tunneling, that fusion, these are the parts of the instinct, like that ability to just sort of merge with another person and really get inside them, and that exchange of energy, the charisma that's involved in that has really been useful for me in my coaching.
Well, and it draws its capacity to draw out the other.
Yeah.
And give them space to be themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
really good about that.
Yeah. 7s are characteristically, generally, non-judgmental types,
Right.
So, people can open up, and they do, and like, it doesn't faze me, it's like,
Right.
Enjoy the conversation. But again, I think that was the moment where it clicked. Oh, sexual 7. Coaching, right.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
It explained a lot of my problems growing up in church as well as a sexual type. So
right, because you're gonna be shamed for what you are.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I think there is something to be said, which is a whole other topic. Sometimes your natural disposition, your type, and your instinctual stacking, which people ask about instincts or subtypes, and we are going to go into that in this next year. We will be exploring that a lot more. But depending on that, your wiring, that regard, sometimes your environment will double down on it, and you will be completely supported because you fit in the structure you're in. But if you don't fit entirely in the structure you're in, then it's a struggle, and then there's a lot that can go wrong in that situation. And yeah, there is a sort of a judgment, and you don't fit, and this part of you is wrong because, like I said, we moralize our structure, our type. And if you're in an environment like in a religious environment, there's going to be even more of a doubling down on you don't quite fit, or you don't quite belong, or this part of you is fundamentally wrong or morally wrong or something along those lines. And that makes that really, really difficult.
Yeah.
When I look at my interest in the Enneagram and what drew me to it, so much of it was around questions that I've sat with my entire life going, why don't I fit? Why don't I make sense with the environments I'm in? Why is it that everyone else can sort of fit or wants to even? And I have no desire. I don't care to. It was like
you didn't care to fit in?
Well, it was this really weird feeling. Like I wanted to belong. I didn't want to fit in.
Oh, okay.
That's a nuance that I think.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I think I was paying attention to as I was thinking through this question, because I'm like, why does everyone want to dress the same way? Why do they care to use these same phrases? Like, why do they want to watch these shows or these sports things? Like, I want to belong with you guys, but I don't care about anything that you guys all seem to care about. And why do you care about something just because this other person does? And so we were just talking about instincts. So like, I am a social 8, and my social thing means I want to understand the group dynamics. I want to understand how the group sort of works together, and the uniqueness of individuals and the kind of coming together. But like, I don't really understand how I fit in it. I never belonged to a particular social group. Like, I was always floating between groups. I would sit at a different lunch table every day. I
Hmm.
just didn't do the things that I saw everyone else doing. And it felt really strange. And so I was always, for me, it wasn't trauma that pushed me into the exploration of personality and differences of people. It was really just kind of confusion. Just going, I don't understand. Why are these different tables? Like, why are these kids that all look this way, like sitting together and talking, and they have the same inside jokes? And like, and what's wrong with me just walking up and joining them? Like, I just didn't understand sort of the structure. And I think I started exploring personality stuff in high school. I remember reading the Please Understand Me book,
Oh, wow.
the
Yeah.
Myers-Briggs one. I think I was
Yeah.
like 15 or 16, and I checked it out at the library. I still remember, like, and I had like paper, and I wrote down all the notes, and I took the test that was in the back, and I came out as an INTJ. And I've always been an INTJ, but I was always barely on the line. So it didn't really answer my questions, because I was like, and and this was an interesting thing for me in most personality tests as I started exploring that space. Like, oh, there's different people in the world. There's this thing called personality, and people are different. But anytime I took these tests, I would kind of not have a clear answer. Even the first time I took like a paid Enneagram test, I had almost a 6-way tie. Within, I was a point away from each different thing. But I just always had this question of, why don't I fit when I want to belong? And there were some painful things where if you don't just try and go along with what everyone's saying, people kind of look at you and be like, there's probably something wrong, because they're not meeting the sort of expectations. And especially in like a religious or a church world. And I had leaders who I had worked under, like, loved working with me. But then when it came to someone who didn't know me, like a position would open or an opportunity would be there, and they'd be like, well, what about Jim? Jim's great. And I literally had leaders sit down with me and be like, we don't trust you. And then I had some that I later worked with and sat with and got close to, and they told me, they're like, oh, when I first met you, I didn't trust you because I didn't think I could control you. Right. You can't control me, but you don't need to. And so I constantly was having these experiences, which was like, be yourself, not that much. We want your skills, but we don't want all of who you are. Like, or you need to limit yourself in this way. Bring your energy down here. That was too much. And you just get these messages your whole life, and you're like, I feel like I'm doing the best I can, but I just don't know how to fit. And I don't know how to operate in this environment. And I'm completely conflicted between this feeling like, I like that I'm different. I like that I'm not like everyone else. I like that I have this sort of good sense of self, and sometimes feeling really lonely in that space. And so it ran on these parallel tracks between, I like that I'm different. I like that I will float around to different social groups. And I feel really lonely because I don't really have like my group. I feel like I did have this sense of wanting to belong, but simultaneously not wanting to just fit in by doing what other people wanted. And so like my whole life, I sort of felt like I lived in this confusion. And later in life, it started to get even more complicated when I did get into leadership and I was leading people. And then I started feeling like I was running against certain kinds of failures, because I would mentor. I got really into mentoring. I've done it actually since I was like in high school. I would take like younger high school kids and teach them how to like lead bands or whatever, and take them under my wing and spend time with them. So mentoring and discipleship, leadership, call it coaching, whatever you want to call it, something I always did. But I was so frustrated by, why is it some people thrive under me and they grow and they become like more than they could have been. And I love that. I celebrate that. And it was this awesome moment. And then other people would just kind of get burned out from spending time with me, even in mentoring capacity, and just kind of pull back and disappear. And I'm like, I failed them somehow. And sometimes I would just blame them. Like, you just couldn't get with the program. So it was very easy to shift it externally. Like, this is your problem. You're not willing to do the work. And that was very easy kind of cop out. But then other times I would get kind of frustrated. Like, I poured years into you. Like, I think I somehow failed you. So all of these mixed messages were kind of coming at me my whole life, and I just didn't know how to do it. Like, this is all the way into my 30s. And like, why are all of these things happening in me simultaneously?
Mm.
And then obviously, like marriage, there's all of these things kind of come up where, being that Abby and I work with couples, and we talk to couples about this, how we don't realize where we've basically kept a journal our whole lives of everything we want in this other person, our expectations of what this relationship's going to look like. But we write it in invisible ink. Then we hand them the journal and be like, here's your job description. Like, unintentionally. But we do this subconsciously. We just put all these expectations that we've been building our whole lives onto this other person and what it's going to look like. And there's an element where we love this person because they have things that we don't have. But there's this other element where we fundamentally believe we do certain things right, and they're the ones who will eventually change and get it right. And we're going to change this other person.
Yeah.
And then, man, are we going to, like, we already have a good relationship, but man, we're going to have a great relationship once they become more like me in this way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Abby and I talked about that on the podcast we did, but like having to just apologize once I became more aware of some of this, and just being like, I treated you for years like you needed to be more like me. And how often I make the world and try to make the world in my image. And we're just like sitting there weeping one night, just like, I can't believe I did this.
Yeah.
But it really wasn't until, coming to the Enneagram, because like the other personality types, they told me kind of ways that I function, but it couldn't tell me what to do about it. Working with the Myers-Briggs for a while, working with the DISC for a while, working with, Strength Finders or any of these other ones. But it didn't say, like, this is your motivation. This is what's driving you. And this is what it actually does for you in a beautiful way. And then this is the way it actually wrecks your life. And I didn't realize why I was really good at strengthening some people. And then other things I would do, I would like leave a body count of hurt people. And I had no idea why. But I think starting to explore the Enneagram, 5 or 6 years ago, and just starting to kind of jump in and go, oh, I think I'm a 3. I always thought I was either a 3, a 7, or 8 because I knew I was one of the dominant types, but I didn't know kind of what the driving motivation was. And there was a lot of 3 in there. And I thought, well, because I'm an artist, I may have that 4 wing. And I have a lot of 4 shows up. Whenever I've taken the test, it's been like 3, 8, 7, 4 are all really close. With like the lowest in like 9, 6, and unfortunately 2, which is supposed to be a good resource point for me.
Yeah.
But when I came to the Enneagram, I was like, I'm finally starting to get a holistic picture to the questions I've had about myself and how I operate in the world my whole life. Like, I'm finally starting to get a picture of why I wanted to belong, but I didn't want to fit in. Why I liked that I was different, but I felt lonely. But even more than that, I feel like it gave me more of a capacity to see the other. So it's this dual thing that we find when we hit a point of growth, which is when we honestly can see ourselves and we can honestly see the other. Because 7s are naturally non-judgmental types. I'm an 8. I'm a naturally very judgmental type. And I think most of my life I've been very judgmental. I'm right. I will convince you or beat you into agreeing with me. Of course, I would have never said that. Of course, you would notice that. But I think there was an operating system in the back of the mind that was sophisticated versions of trying to get that to happen.
Sure. Yeah.
But since coming to that, I think, I've become, far less judgmental, and I'm far more aware of my own impact on others, particularly my closest relationship with my wife. And I think it does wake me up to the kind of parent I naturally am, because there's something about these small children who are just all reaction and emotion and visceral, and it just draws that out of me. And then I realize like how much further I have to go, how often I have to like sit with my daughter and apologize and say, and explain to her, like, I did this and I reacted this way and I should have reacted this way, but we're all learning. because she'll get really frustrated with herself if she doesn't do something right the first time.
Mm.
But if I constantly am like trying to set this model of like, we're all learning, we are all in development, we are all in process. I felt really bad because I was like just last night, she's working on her homework. You know, we had done a couple days up in Acadia, took a couple days off. And so she had like didn't get her catch up homework until yesterday. And she had like 6 pieces of homework, which is a lot for a first grader. And on the last piece, I'm getting frustrated with her. Like, you just did this on a harder piece. This was an older piece of homework. You just have to do the same thing. I'm getting really frustrated. I'm being really hard on her. And she's getting upset. And we finally get it right. And then she hugs me and she's like, Daddy, I'm sorry I didn't do a good job on my homework. And I'm like, no, you did fine. I'm really sorry. Like, that was a lot to put on you. And I was being really hard on you. And I want you to do well. But sometimes, like, my natural thing is I'm too hard on people because I want to make sure that you're strong and I want to make sure that you're working on things. And, but we all have a lot to learn, and you did a really great job. And it would have been fine. I wouldn't have had that reaction if she would have just been like, well, fine. And you and it was just like all anger. But because she's like, I'm sorry I didn't do a good job, it made me realize like, no, it was me. Like, I was pushing you too hard. And all of these things, like in my marriage and in fatherhood and in my friendships, like I wouldn't have been able to do this without this tool that's waking me up that says like, this is what's driving you. Yeah. You want to make people stronger, but sometimes you really hurt them in the process. You're like the trainer that pushes people way too far until they're like throwing up and they have a joint disorder and a pulled muscle. Like, you want to be the good kind of trainer, the good kind of coach that gets people that actually makes them stronger. But you don't even notice how hard you push yourself.
Right.
I'm using this thing called the Whoop strap now, which is like this, it's kind of like a fitness wearable, but it tells you about your recovery each day through a bunch of different stuff I won't get into, but basically gives you a percentage, like this is where you are physically today. And I just go, really? I feel fine. It says I'm in the red because I will just push myself and I will push everyone else to just go instead of actually stopping and being like, you know what? You need to slow down. You need to have grace for yourself. You need to be okay. You need to love the people around you and accept them and not try and force the world into your image all the time. But regardless of your type, like everyone out there listening, you have something about your type that is an absolute gift to everyone around you. And then you have other parts that are going to create these patterns in your life where you go, I don't understand why I'm having these kinds of relationships or being attracted to these kinds of people and all of that. And it's really hard. But once you actually start to look at it and start to see it, like it's both convicting and liberating.
You know, you're describing so well the compulsion and the gift. There's both there's the compulsion of the type. That's the, you know, what you're describing as like push, train people, make them stronger because they have to be, because this world is not a very safe or very easy place to be. Yeah. So, you know, you push them to be stronger, right? And when you tune in, as you were describing this, the tuning into that compulsion, right? Yeah. That compulsion does not allow thinking to come in. That it doesn't allow that discernment, that ability to see, like, this is actually not good. This is actually too far. This is going to hurt, right? Whereas the gift, when it isn't driven by that compulsion, is capable of seeing how to actually make people stronger. So the thing with the 8 is it's not about the messages that are oftentimes communicated is pull back, Jim, you're too much, dial back. Okay, fine. That may be true in a particular given moment, but you're not giving a different path forward.
Right.
Okay? So the path forward is, now it's not about pulling back. It's about your ability to discern what is being driven by the compulsion, the need to be strong because the weak are the ones that get crushed, and because the world is not safe, and because you can't allow vulnerability to emerge in yourself or weakness to be there. It's like that compulsion, that's the thing to pay attention to to notice the difference between that and when you're functioning from your high side, which is, no, I'm already strong. I don't need to be stronger. And I can actually thoughtfully and using discernment, know when it is time to really push and use the fullness of my strength to really help somebody.
And to redefine what strength actually is.
Yeah.
Because it takes more strength to apologize to a 6-year-old than to tell one what to do. Like these are the ways that we have to learn to operate in life. This is what I want to be good at.
Yeah.
And in just a coaching conversation this morning, like in being willing to like be vulnerable and say this stuff is like, oh, right, this is keeping me in the game, making me more aware of my own growth, to have these kinds of conversations, to like lean into this space. Because I think regardless, as you may have grown up and you've been like, why did I always want to fit in? Why did I always kind of follow the crowd? And then other people may relate more to me where I'm just like, why didn't I? Why didn't I take the normal life path that everyone else around me was taking? Why didn't I date like everyone else? Why didn't I do any of these things like other people? But regardless, like it's waking up to yourself and your own life and your own patterns. And I think the reason that we were drawn to the Enneagram and why we stay engaged is because it helps us do the one thing that actually helps you move forward, which is to look at your light and your darkness, your chaos and your order simultaneously with honesty, acceptance, and actually know what to do next and what's the next step that you can actually take.
Earlier, you mentioned this thing of, and you've said it several times, the belonging and the fitting, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you and I have had conversations about this belonging and how to belong. And, you've been influenced by Brene Brown. And you connected two stories, which is very interesting to me. One was that in this world you grew up in the church world, with leaders that had a particular way of doing things that you wanted to fit, or even in school, you're talking about that as well. Like you wanted to belong.
Yeah.
But you found yourself having a hard time belonging to any single group. And you connected that to also fitting in. And then you described the story with you and your wife and wanting her to, describing how, and this happens with, I think, most couples, wanting to try to fix the other person for them to be better, for them to be different. And in a sense, I wonder if you see the connection between those two, where there's on one side, you feel like I don't fit in and I don't belong anywhere. And yet in my own relationship with my wife, I want her to adjust in a certain way.
Yeah, exactly.
So, do you see that connection?
It's a total irony. Yeah, it's a total irony.
Yeah.
You do belong to me, but here's another way I want you to fit in with me.
Yeah.
And I have 16 years of failing to get her to show up on time. But now it's like, oh, I don't care. It doesn't bother me. Like, and I was like the most anal on that stuff in the world. Like the people I played in like high school church worship teams with, they knew if they were 5 minutes late, I was on the phone with their replacement. Like it was always a big deal to me. Like to be early is to be on time is to be late is to be fired. And like, that is just like drilled into me. I don't know. I must have some German watchmakers somewhere in my past. But
there's
like,
that gene floating around in your...
That gene is in there. Like I can tell you what time it is without looking at a clock for several hours. But there's this other thing where it's just like, I'm being a dick for nothing. Like that's what I actually started like realizing. And I think, sorry.
Is there an acceptance of yourself in some regards that also helps with the acceptance of other people? Like
absolutely.
The whole belonging thing, I think, is such a beautiful way of looking at how do we belong, is by not trying to fit in, but by being fully accepted for who we are as we are.
Well, it's the external thing that you're talking about.
Yeah.
When we're really judgmental to other people, we're doing it to ourselves.
Yeah.
It's we can't do one without the other. We can't externalize the enemy without actually, like, when they talk about like people who are like the most aggressive towards others have like the most self-hatred.
Yeah.
It was all of that has to kind of get dealt with. And It's a good thing.
Well, that's the gift of the Enneagram, is the ability to show us. And I mean, again, we're talking about the Enneagram. We do this podcast using the Enneagram. It's the most powerful tool I've ever run into.
Yeah.
But it's a tool, and its design is really about how do we grow and how do we develop. And, that's really for us the most magical part of the Enneagram is growth, is the transformation.
Totally.
Initially it's amazing to see your type and to go, wow, this is who I am,
Yeah. And I'm dedicated more to transformation and seeing people transformation and living my own transformation than I am the Enneagram as a tool. Somebody asked like, well, why the Enneagram? Why this, that? I'm like, same reason I play guitar more than I play any other instrument. It's the tool that makes the most sense in my hands. It's just the one I play the best.
Yeah.
Like I've seen other people who can play other things really, really well. That's great. Please keep doing it, because one aspect and one tool is not going to do all the work. But this is the best one for me to use. It's been the best one for me personally. And so therefore I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
And it just makes the most sense to go that direction. If you find a tool that's working for you better, I'm like, just do your work.
It's the spiritual journey. Like the spiritual journey is not the Enneagram. The spiritual journey is this sort of larger thing that is hard for us to describe, right? There are tools that help us along the way on our spiritual path. Right? So that's what we're focused on, and this is why we call it the art of growth, is because for us, it's about this path that we're on, and we use multiple tools and
I'll use the best of anything I can find anywhere.
Absolutely.
And you're a 7, you're going to do that anyway.
Of course. Of course. Yeah.
Thanks again for joining us today. If you haven't left us a review yet on iTunes, please do so. It helps people find the show. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that. And if you need to contact us, you can do that through our hub, theartofgrowth.org. This show is produced by me, Jim Zartman, at Talkie Records Studio in Lynn, Massachusetts. All music by me as well, and we're going to take it out today with a new track. Have a good week.